We have been going through the book of Matthew, looking at Jesus and his interactions with his disciples, asking the question, what was he teaching to them? What correction was he bringing to them? What application was he applying to their life? What was he trying to teach to them? And then how do those lessons translate to us today as his modern day disciples? We find ourselves today reading from the ESV in Matthew 19. And in Matthew 19, Jesus is approached by a group of Pharisees while he's teaching. And they ask him the question, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? This was a teaching that was common with this group at this time. They taught that a man could divorce his wife for any reason that he sees fit. Jesus responds and he takes them back to the start. He says, in the beginning, God made man and woman, put the two together. He said that a man would leave his mother and father and cling to his wife, that the two would become one, and what God has put together, let no man separate. And he makes the distinction, he makes an exemption. He says that the only reason for divorce is from sexual immorality. And the Pharisees respond and they say, well, Moses said that if, someone has an affair, we could divorce, give them a certificate of divorce. And some actually taught that you had to give a certificate of divorce. That was automatically like you didn't have a choice in the matter. And Jesus' response to that was that, it wasn't always this way. From the beginning, that wasn't the case, but because of your hardness of hearts. And we're not going to go into this today, but I will make the brief comment that divorce is something that people too easily go into today. Even in the church, marriage is often not seen with the level of respect and honor and sacredness that the Bible teaches us to hold for it. And you can go and read the prophet Hosea and see what that teaches us about marriage, and that even though there might be the opportunity, wrong word, even though sexual immorality, like an affair, brings about a just possibility of divorce, it shouldn't be our first option. It shouldn't be something that we seek out. Anyways, let's carry on. So he gives this teaching talking about the sacredness of marriage, the intensity of marriage, the intensity of that union. His disciples respond to him. The disciples said to him, if such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry. But he said to them, not everyone can receive the saying, but to those whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who is able to receive this, receive it. And so he has this interesting response, right? The disciples, they're kind of freaked out about this. And they're saying, if that's the case, like if I marry this woman, and it turns out to be a miserable relationship, or it turns out that she's barren and we can't have kids, or it turns whatever outside of sexual immorality, like I'm stuck with this person, I have to care for them. And at the time, that was a big deal. Like, marriage, it was about procreation, and the man would care for that woman. And oftentimes there was like kind of this ruling that, if within like 10 years of being married, you didn't have a kid, well then obviously she's barren, and so you could then divorce her to find a wife who could give you kids. And Jesus is teaching against that. And so they say, if that's the case, then it would be better simply not to be married, which is an odd way to think about things, I think, but regardless, let's look at this. So Jesus gives this example of the eunuch. Some people are born a eunuch, unable to have children, unable to engage in sexual activity. And some people are made that way. At the time, the eunuch, one of the primary roles for eunuch, was actually to care for women. And so that person, would be forced into being a eunuch so that they would not be able to engage with the women that they were caring for. And then it says that some choose to be a eunuch for the sake of the kingdom. And this is an interesting thought as well. So these people choose this. They choose to disengage from sexuality, from marriage. They choose to be celibate, basically. And that it's for the sake of the kingdom. So this opens up a couple of ideas that are worth exploring. Number one would be the idea of the eunuch's role in the culture of the day of caring for women. This was a common thing that they would do. And so that in that person would still care for the church, would care for the women in the church. And also this idea a little bit connected of if you're in a marriage, but yet it feels celibate, like there's not much going on in the bedroom. That's not a reason for divorce. Instead, we should still care for our spouse and treat them well and take care of them. Anyhow, but then there's this idea also of those who choose celibacy, who choose not to be married. And that if they're able to choose that, and if they're able to go through with that, then that's fine. That's something that they can do, and it's a blessed thing to do. And that they have more time, energy, resources available for the benefit of the kingdom. Not necessarily just simply for the benefit of themselves, but for the benefit of the kingdom, that they would be able to serve the church in that way. In a similarly connected way would be the couple that's unable to have kids or chooses not to have kids. They have a level of freedom, and I know those who want kids and can't, that might sound a harsh way to say it, but I don't know how else to say it. They have a level of freedom that they can use to help serve the kingdom of God and help serve the church. And so there's a couple things that we should also address that are tied to this. There's the idea that people have that these people would be at a higher level. You have the celibate Christian, and then you have the regular Christian. That's not the case. That's not biblical, and we don't see that. There's also the idea that you see this in Roman Catholicism, that certain ministry roles call for celibacy. Once again, we don't see that as a biblical example. Jesus chose to be celibate. Paul chose to be celibate, but Peter was not. Peter was a married man, and yet he served the kingdom of God in a major, major way. And so you can be either or and still serve the kingdom of God, and being married or being celibate does not grant you some level over the other. And then there's the idea of in your marriage caring for those, right? So he uses the example of the eunuch, this person who often would care for the women. And regardless if there's a lot of sex or no sex in your marriage union, regardless if you can have children or you can't have children, regardless of whatever circumstances outside of sexual immorality, care for your spouse, love your spouse. I think that's really the application here is, first of all, the sacredity of marriage. Understand that it's not something that we can just get out of lightly. It's not something that you can just avoid. And so if you look at that and you have the reaction, which seems foreign to me, but I'm a married man who loves my wife, but similar reaction to the disciples of, man, what, I'd be stuck with this woman for the rest of my life, or this man for the rest of my life, and there's no option of divorce or getting out. Like, what if I end up not liking them? What if life goes a certain way? Then yeah, stay single, and serve the kingdom in that way. We can also look to the verse of Paul where it says, but do so for the kingdom of God. But if your passion burns within you, then it would be good for you to be married, because then you can explore that passion with your spouse in a holy and biblical way. And so we need to look at that. We need to understand that. And so love your spouse, care for your spouse, understand the sacredity of marriage. Don't look for a way to get out of marriage, but rather serve your spouse and love your spouse regardless of the conditions you find yourself in. And if you have been called to celibacy, or if celibacy is the life that you're choosing to do so not for your own personal gain or your own level of freedom, but that you might serve the kingdom of God, and that you could honor God in your celibacy, just like those who are in their marriage, that they would honor God in their marriage. I hope that's helpful to you today. I hope you find that as an encouragement. And I love you guys. Have a great day. Honor God in all that you do.